Alright, back at it, because the storyline that refuses to stay quiet has just kicked the front door down all over again, and Claressa Shields is right in the middle of the smoke like clockwork. Try to wrap your head around this. After everything that already lit up the timeline this year, Claressa Shields somehow found a brand new way to hand the internet a viral moment nobody was asking for, and the reactions are ugly, loud, and rolling in from every direction. If you thought the Chris Cyborg jokes had cooled, if you thought the Papoose whispers had faded, if you thought the Remy Ma temperature had finally dropped a couple of degrees, you were wrong, and painfully wrong, because Claressa Shields just walked onto a podcast, opened her mouth, and detonated the entire conversation on herself. Nobody saw this coming, at least not like this, and the clip is already tearing across every platform faster than her PR team can even attempt damage control. Against all odds, Claressa Shields has now managed to turn a simple podcast appearance into what a lot of viewers are calling the most awkward 30 seconds of her entire year, and once you see it you'll understand why every hip-hop corner of the internet is suddenly relitigating her whole music resume. Buckle up first. This one is going to demand your full attention because there are 3 separate scandals braided into one interview, and by the time we're done breaking it down piece by piece you're going to see exactly why fans, critics, boxing insiders, and hip-hop diehards are all screaming the same thing at the same time. And yes, before anybody in the comments accuses me of jumping on a bandwagon, the tape doesn't lie, we're going to roll every second of it, and you can be the judge from your own screen. Now, before I even press play on the footage, let me set the scene the way people online are setting it, because the context matters. The neighborhood talk grabbed the clip first, which is how it hit the trending column overnight, and within a couple of hours the whole thing had ballooned into a full-blown thread war between Claressa Shields loyalists on one side and pretty much the entire hip-hop underground on the other. By the time the sun came up, veterans, casual fans, boxing analysts, and even a few names you'd never expect were quietly liking screenshots that torched Claressa Shields harder than any diss record has ever managed to. Straight up, if you've been watching this saga develop with even a little bit of interest, this next chapter is the one you're going to remember, because it doesn't just add fuel to the fire, it pours the whole gas station on top and hands the internet a lighter. Page 2, the setup and the freestyle ambush. Here's the setup. Claressa Shields was invited onto a podcast to promote her upcoming bout, which, on paper, should have been a soft, friendly, no-pressure sit-down. The host is a fan, the vibe was casual, the questions were softball, and honestly, if Claressa Shields had simply talked about training camp, her weight class strategy, or even her thoughts on the state of women's boxing, we would not be having this conversation right now. Instead, for reasons that continue to baffle everybody watching, the tone shifted the moment the host asked Claressa Shields to spit a freestyle on the spot, and from that instant forward, everything went sideways in real time. This wasn't a pre-planned segment. This wasn't a promotional beat. This was a random ambush of a request that Claressa Shields could easily have laughed off, deflected, or shelved for later, and instead, she took the bait. The moment the word freestyle left the host's mouth, Claressa Shields visibly hesitated, and for anybody who has ever watched a battle rap set or even the average cypher on any of the major radio shows, that hesitation was the first red flag. Real freestylers don't pause. They don't stall. They don't buy time with jokes about who they are or aren't. They open their mouth and the bars fall out because that's the definition of a freestyle. Claressa Shields, on the other hand, went silent for what felt like a small eternity, made a couple of half-joking deflections about not being Papoose, and then finally scrambled together a couple of lines that, depending on who you ask, either sounded rehearsed or sounded like nothing at all. I need to be crystal clear about something before we move on. Nobody in the audience walked in expecting Claressa Shields to be a Grammy-caliber lyricist. Nobody was demanding a 16-bar masterclass. Nobody was expecting her to sound like Rhapsody. What people were expecting was the basic minimum any performer in that moment should be able to deliver, a little confidence, a few clean lines, and an ounce of that off-the-top magic that separates rappers from people who write raps down. And Claressa Shields could not clear that bar. She could not even see the bar. She swung at it, missed, tripped over her own confidence, and then tried to pretend she'd just knocked it out of the park. Page 3, the first clip and the verdict block. Roll the tape, because context always matters, and I want you to see it exactly the way the internet saw it before I even weigh in. Watch how the host tees it up. Watch how Claressa Shields pivots into the Papoose joke as a stall tactic. Watch how the seconds tick away while she gathers her thoughts. And watch how, when the words finally do come out, they land nowhere near the confidence Claressa Shields projects any other time she opens her mouth. This is not a snippet cherry-picked to embarrass her. This is the full moment, and it speaks for itself. Now, in my honest opinion, that was one of the most uncomfortable 30-second stretches Claressa Shields has ever put on camera, and that is a genuinely stacked shelf to compete with. This wasn't a freestyle. This was a stall session with a beat in the background. And I say that not to pile on, because piling on has become the entire cottage industry surrounding Claressa Shields at this point, but because the gap between how confidently Claressa Shields carries herself in every other lane and how completely lost she looked in this moment is genuinely striking. Boxing is a discipline she has earned. Rap is a discipline she keeps auditioning for. And the audition tape is not passing the vibe check. Where I come from, and I know this is going to sound harsh, if somebody hands you the microphone and asks you to freestyle, that is not a threat. That is not a trap. That is a golden opportunity. That is your open floor moment to prove that you belong in the conversation you keep inserting yourself into. You don't stall. You don't hesitate. You don't pull out a canned lyric about being broke and telling critics to get their money up, because every rapper who has ever been mildly disrespected has said the exact same thing on the exact same beat. The internet has heard that verse 1,000 times, from 100 different mouths, and Claressa Shields just delivered version number 1001 with the same energy as everybody else. And here is the part that a lot of people have been quietly saying but nobody has really said loud enough: every time Claressa Shields does something like this, the boxing community winces. Because whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's her intention, the freestyle circus keeps pulling attention away from the actual accolades Claressa Shields has legitimately earned inside the ring. 4-division undisputed. Olympic gold. Historic pay-per-view figures. That's a resume most fighters would kill for. And yet, week after week, month after month, the conversation about Claressa Shields keeps drifting away from the sport and toward things that undermine the sport she supposedly loves. Page 4, the Papoose hypocrisy reframe. Let's talk about the Papoose deflection for a second, because that line, "I'm not Papoose," has already turned into its own micro-controversy, and for good reason. First of all, nobody in the room was accusing Claressa Shields of being Papoose. That comparison didn't fall out of the sky. It didn't come from the host. It didn't come from a heckler. It came from Claressa Shields herself, which means she introduced Papoose into the conversation as a shield, and in doing so, she quietly conceded a very inconvenient point: Papoose exists as a mental reference in her own head when she's about to freestyle. Now here's the twist that a lot of people caught immediately. Papoose, for all the jokes at his expense over the years, is genuinely a bar-heavy lyricist. The man can rap. He might not be a mainstream chart topper, and he might catch heat online for 100 different reasons, but as a technical rapper, Papoose can absolutely spit. So when Claressa Shields tries to distance herself from Papoose while simultaneously delivering a freestyle that couldn't clear a Papoose album cut on its worst day, the optics get very, very rough. It is the kind of cell phone the internet feasts on for weeks. And then there's the deeper subtext, which is where a lot of the online commentary has been living. A lot of viewers believe Claressa Shields has been carefully constructing a music lane for herself, drawing a very specific set of comparisons, not to Papoose, but to somebody very close to Papoose. The aesthetics. The braid patterns. The photo shoot poses. The interview cadence. The bar structure. The video wardrobes. For months, side-by-side comparisons have been flooding social media, and the pattern is a lot louder than the coincidence defense can survive. Claressa Shields keeps trying to remind us she's not Papoose while the internet keeps reminding her she might be echoing somebody else in that same household, and the more Claressa Shields swats at that theory, the louder the theory grows. Page 5, the industry standard authority transfer. Now imagine, just for a second, if Claressa Shields tried to pull that same performance on a real hip-hop platform. Imagine walking into Sway in the morning with that energy. Sway hands you the headphones. The beat drops. And you sit there in silence for 28 seconds trying to gather your thoughts before offering a recycled verse about your critics being broke. It wouldn't just be uncomfortable. It would end careers. Sway doesn't hold hands. Sway doesn't hand out participation trophies. Sway hands you a microphone and expects you to prove that you deserve the oxygen you're breathing in that room. Or picture the same moment on SiriusXM Hip Hop Nation. Or on Rap Radar. Or on Drink Champs, where NRE would have replayed the clip in slow motion just to keep himself entertained. The reception in those rooms would have been merciless, and every single one of those rooms is a room Claressa Shields would need to earn access to if she genuinely wants to build a music career the way she keeps signaling she does. That's the disconnect. Claressa Shields is chasing rap credibility on podcasts that will nod along politely, while dodging the platforms that would actually stress test whether the credibility is real. Now, to be fair, some corners of the industry are notoriously softer. The Breakfast Club, depending on the week and the guest and the host lineup, has been known to give certain controversial performers gentler landings than others. And there are podcasts that will let a guest say almost anything without pushback. But those rooms are not the rooms where reputations get built. They're the rooms where reputations get laundered. And Claressa Shields keeps auditioning in the laundering rooms while telling the world she's ready for the Coliseum. Page 6, clip number 2 and the legend comparison detonation. Roll it again, because it only gets wilder from here. What comes next is the part of the clip that has arguably drawn even more heat than the freestyle itself, and once you hear it, you'll understand why the fallout has been so severe. The host, apparently swept up in the moment, hypes Claressa Shields up like she just delivered a Hall of Fame performance. Move out the way, Lil' Kim. Move out the way, Foxy Brown. There's a new star in town. Read that back to yourself slowly, because those are two of the most sacred names in the female rap canon, and dropping them next to what we all just heard is the kind of comparison that violates every unwritten rule of the culture. Lil' Kim is a foundational architect. Foxy Brown redefined the archetype. These are women who battled through unimaginable circumstances to carve out lanes for every female MC who came after them, and their catalogs, their bars, their delivery, their impact, are not up for casual debate. To even joke about a freestyle like the one Claressa Shields just gave being on that level is a cultural offense the internet does not take lightly, and the comments section reacted accordingly. Within hours, Lil' Kim fans, Foxy Brown fans, hip-hop historians, and even people who don't care about either boxing or rap were queuing up to remind Claressa Shields that some comparisons need to be earned, not shouted into a microphone. And here's where the story pivots into what many people are calling the most damaging moment of the entire interview. Because it's one thing to accept an over-the-top compliment. It's another thing entirely to sit there and nod along while somebody rearranges the female rap Mount Rushmore around your performance. Claressa Shields didn't push back. Claressa Shields didn't laugh it off. Claressa Shields didn't say, "Let me earn that first." She let the comparison sit, she let the sentence breathe, and she moved forward like the crown had just been placed on her head by a legitimate authority. Page 7. The Remy Ma revelation, the peak. Now we arrive at the moment that broke the internet clean in half. The host lists off the modern female rap heavyweights, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, Glorilla, and somewhere in that stretch of the conversation, somebody drops the name Remy Ma. And Claressa Shields, without missing a beat, says she doesn't really know many of Remy Ma's songs. Read that again. Claressa Shields, on tape, in 2026, said she doesn't know Remy Ma's music. Let that sit for a second, because the internet certainly did. Within minutes, the receipts started flying. Old posts. Old photos. Old comments. Old public appearances. Old interviews. Old references. Old ring walks. Old outfit choices. Old hairstyles. Old poses. Old caption plays. The paper trail is not subtle. The paper trail is louder than a bullhorn in an empty stadium. And every piece of that paper trail contradicts, in some form or another, the idea that Claressa Shields somehow has zero familiarity with Remy Ma's catalog. That claim was dead on arrival before Claressa Shields even finished the sentence. Here is the truly wild part. Claressa Shields mentioned Cardi B. She mentioned Megan Thee Stallion. She mentioned Glorilla. She mentioned Lil' Kim and Foxy Brown and Eve. She did not mention Nicki Minaj. And she claimed not to know Remy Ma. The list of who Claressa Shields chose to name, and, more importantly, the list of who Claressa Shields chose not to name, reads less like a spontaneous conversation and more like a carefully edited playlist designed to signal something very specific. Cardi B has famously shown love to Remy Ma. Nicki Minaj has had public tensions with Remy Ma. The absence of Nicki Minaj and the ghosting of Remy Ma from Claressa Shields' list is either the world's most convenient coincidence or a very intentional message. And the internet is not buying the coincidence. Page 8, the evidence stack/receipts avalanche. Now for the paper trail, because if a single Instagram screenshot doesn't move the needle, maybe 200 of them stitched together will. Fans and content creators have been building a case for months, and the interview just handed them the mother of all Exhibit A moments. Let's walk through it. Exhibit 1. The fashion overlap. Countless posts have compared side-by-side outfits, showing Claressa Shields wearing near-identical looks Remy Ma has worn in previous appearances. Whether it's a fitted leather set, a signature braid pattern, or a specific pose in front of a specific backdrop, the visual echoes stack up. Coincidence is possible in 1 or 2 instances. Coincidence gets harder to defend in 10. Exhibit 2. The ring walk playlists. Fans have documented multiple boxing entrances where the accompanying music, staging, and camera angles bear a strong resemblance to Remy Ma's visual language. Every time a new clip surfaces, the argument that Claressa Shields has no awareness of Remy Ma's work becomes harder to hold up in a courtroom of viral evidence. Exhibit 3. The social timing. Supporters of Remy Ma have pointed out that certain social media posts from Claressa Shields have gone up almost immediately after Remy Ma has posted or released music. When the timing lines up that consistently, the "we're not paying attention to each other" defense starts to crumble at the edges. Exhibit 4. The public comments. There are old interview clips floating around where Claressa Shields references specific things that would require at least a working familiarity with Remy Ma's career. And once those clips resurface, the internet does what the internet always does, it stitches them together, adds a soundtrack, and blasts them across every timeline until the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. Exhibit 5. The hairstyle iterations. From braid patterns to specific color choices, side-by-side galleries have been circulating that make the aesthetic overlap almost too clean to accept as chance. Fans of Claressa Shields have tried to argue that black women share hairstyles all the time, which is fair. But the pattern here isn't a single style. It's a rolling series of styles that appear on Remy Ma first and then appear on Claressa Shields shortly after. Exhibit 6. The catchphrase drift. Certain phrases and hooks that Claressa Shields has used in her music and in her promotional content have been flagged by fans as too structurally similar to specific Remy Ma bars to feel accidental. Bars can rhyme by coincidence. Cadence patterns are much harder to accidentally clone. Add all of that up, and the "I don't really know Remy Ma's music" defense doesn't just wobble, it collapses on impact. Which is why the moment Claressa Shields said it, the archive never blinked. Every past clip, every past photo, every past screenshot has been resurfacing at high speed, and the collective verdict online has been brutal. Page 9, the boxing fallout and ticket sales subplot. But here's the layer that a lot of the pop culture chatter is missing, and it's the layer boxing insiders have been quietly whispering about for weeks. This freestyle didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened during promotional week for an upcoming Claressa Shields bout that has been struggling to sell tickets. That context changes everything. Every controversy in the build-up to a fight is worth analyzing on 2 levels. There's what the controversy says. And there's what the controversy is designed to do. And the ugly truth is, the more chaotic Claressa Shields' promotional cycles become, the more some observers wonder whether the chaos is a strategy rather than an accident. Because every viral clip drives search traffic. Every viral clip stirs conversation. Every viral clip nudges a couple thousand curious eyeballs toward the pay-per-view checkout page. And when the fight itself isn't generating heat on its own merits, the surrounding drama becomes the marketing plan. Claressa Shields, according to multiple reports, has burned bridges with several of the biggest names in women's boxing. Katie Taylor is a conversation that lives permanently in will they, won't they purgatory. Amanda Serrano has moved on to bigger arenas. Alicia Baumgardner is a whole separate saga. Savannah Marshall is boxing on entirely different cards. And with those matchups either off the table or repeatedly stalled, Claressa Shields is now preparing to face an opponent whose professional resume is significantly thinner than the promotion demands. The undercard adjustments have helped somewhat. Adding recognizable talent underneath a headliner can pull in fans who might otherwise not have bought in for the main event. But the fundamental issue remains, the fight itself is not generating the heat you would expect from a Claressa Shields headliner. And when the fight doesn't generate the heat, the personality does. So every podcast, every headline, every viral clip becomes another line item in an increasingly desperate promotional strategy. Which, if true, would explain why so many of these interviews have started to feel less spontaneous and more calculated. Page 10, the Music AS Strategy Theory. Which brings us to the big question hovering over the entire situation. Is the music thing a genuine passion, or is it a marketing arm? Because both answers are legitimate, but only one of them is being publicly claimed. And the discrepancy between the claim and the pattern is where the trust deficit is growing. Consider the timeline. Claressa Shields released a track. The track dropped in the middle of a promotional cycle. The reactions were mixed. Claressa Shields responded to the reactions with more content. That content generated more reactions. Every reaction fed another round of promotion. And somewhere in there, the boxing story became a music story that became a hip-hop feud story that became a lifestyle story that became, essentially, an endless content mill with Claressa Shields at the center of it. Some corners of the internet are convinced that Claressa Shields is going to lean into the music angle even harder as fight week approaches. There's chatter that the ring walk might include a live music element. There's chatter that the pre-fight press conference might turn into a mini performance. There's chatter that the after-party is being designed around a music release. Whether any of that turns out to be true or not, the fact that people are seriously debating it tells you everything you need to know about how the promotion has been received. And here's the part that even Claressa Shields' most patient fans have started to acknowledge quietly. There is a version of this entire situation where Claressa Shields simply focuses on boxing, dominates the division, keeps her private life private, and lets her hands do the talking. That version of Claressa Shields would probably be one of the most beloved athletes in women's sports right now. The version we're getting instead is the version that keeps generating viral clips for reasons that have nothing to do with jab-cross combinations, and the audience fatigue is becoming impossible to ignore. Page 11, the media mirror and public opinion. Zoom out for a second, because the media landscape here matters more than most viewers realize. There is a specific way stories about Claressa Shields tend to travel. A clip drops on the neighborhood talk or the shade room. The clip gets stitched into commentary videos within hours. The commentary videos get quoted in longer YouTube breakdowns. The YouTube breakdowns get referenced in tweets. The tweets get screenshotted into Instagram carousels. The Instagram carousels get reposted onto TikTok. And by the time 48 hours have passed, the same clip has been recontextualized so many times that the original moment barely matters anymore. That is exactly the pipeline this freestyle has entered. And unlike previous cycles, this one has legs, because it isn't just one controversy, it's three interlocking ones, all landing at the same time. The freestyle itself. The legend comparisons. The Remy Ma denial. Any single one of those would generate a news cycle. Braided together, they generate a genre. And Claressa Shields is now the star of a genre she didn't ask to headline. Public opinion has begun to shift in ways that even Claressa Shields' most reliable defenders can't fully counter. The historic supporters, the ones who have ridden with her since the Olympic run, are getting quieter. The neutral observers are drifting toward critical. The casual viewers, the ones who never had a strong opinion in either direction, are now watching every clip with a skeptical eye. That drift is quiet, but it's real, and once a public figure loses the neutral middle, the recovery is very, very difficult. Page 12, Women's Boxing in the Crossfire. There's also a bigger, more uncomfortable conversation happening beneath all of this, and it deserves its own moment. Women's boxing is at an inflection point. There are more fighters, more cards, more paydays, and more attention than there have ever been. Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano just delivered a trilogy that reshaped how women's boxing gets marketed globally. Alicia Baumgardner remains one of the most polarizing champions in the sport. Savannah Marshall has evolved into a legitimate crossover star. And Claressa Shields, historically the loudest voice in the room, is at risk of being drowned out by her own noise. Every time Claressa Shields creates a viral moment that has nothing to do with her boxing, the sport itself pays a small tax. Because the mainstream conversation gets pulled away from Katie Taylor's technical brilliance, away from Amanda Serrano's guts, away from Alicia Baumgardner's showmanship, and toward another Claressa Shields freestyle discourse. Fans of the sport have started saying this out loud. Fighters, in private, have started saying it too. And promoters, who need every women's boxing card to sell in order to keep the momentum going, are quietly frustrated. That's the tragedy hiding underneath the comedy. The freestyle is funny. The comparisons are absurd. The receipts are entertaining. But the collateral damage is a sport that has spent decades trying to be taken seriously, and every viral distraction adds a little more weight to the wrong side of the scale. Page 13, the online verdict and culture court. Back to the freestyle itself and the reaction it has generated, because the online verdict is worth breaking down in detail. Hip-hop Twitter roasted it within minutes. Boxing Twitter pretended not to have seen it and then quote-tweeted it anyway. Black women writers dissected it with surgical precision. White writers who normally stay out of hip-hop discourse jumped in because the story crossed over into general pop culture. Podcasters replayed it. Radio hosts referenced it. Even a couple of established rappers subtweeted it without naming Claressa Shields, and everybody knew exactly who they were subtweeting. The dominant verdict? It wasn't just a bad freestyle. It was a bad freestyle delivered with the confidence of a good freestyle, and that confidence gap is what has stuck with people. Because a bad freestyle delivered humbly gets forgiven quickly. A bad freestyle delivered with swagger gets memorialized. And this one is going to be memorialized. Screenshots are already being turned into memes. Sound bites are already being turned into TikTok templates. The Papoose deflection is already being turned into a running joke on multiple podcasts. Claressa Shields has now inadvertently added several viral phrases to the internet's shared vocabulary, and none of them are the ones she wanted. Some fans have tried to defend the moment by saying it wasn't fair to spring a freestyle on somebody without warning. And there's a version of that argument that has merit. Nobody should be forced to perform on demand. But that defense collapses under two facts. First, Claressa Shields wasn't forced. She was asked, and she accepted. Second, if you're actively positioning yourself as a rapper, freestyle requests come with the territory. You can't want the rap career and then be surprised when the rap tests show up. Page 14, the Remy Ma silence, and what it means. Meanwhile, Remy Ma herself has remained largely silent through this entire cycle, and that silence is louder than any diss record she could release. Remy Ma has always been one of the smartest strategic voices in hip-hop, and her decision to let the moment breathe without direct engagement has forced the internet to do her arguing for her. Every fan clip, every side-by-side, every receipts thread is essentially unpaid promotion for Remy Ma's brand, and Remy Ma has not had to lift a finger. If Remy Ma decides at some point to formally respond, that will be its own news cycle. But right now, the silence is doing more work than a response ever could. It signals confidence. It signals restraint. It signals the veteran move of letting the newer player exhaust themselves before stepping into the ring. And the contrast between Remy Ma's composure and Claressa Shields' chaos is not lost on anybody paying attention. Papoose, for his part, has kept it relatively quiet as well, occasionally posting cryptic messages that fans have interpreted as commentary on the situation, but never directly engaging. Which, again, is the smarter play. In a situation where the internet is already handling the argument, adding fuel to the fire only makes the story bigger. And the Papoose-Remy-Claressa triangle has already become one of the strangest, most watched storylines of the year. Page 15, broader stakes and future moves. So where does this go from here? A few possibilities. Possibility 1. Claressa Shields doubles down, releases another track, leans into the persona even harder, and turns the entire pre-fight cycle into a musical rollout. That's the highest risk, highest reward path. If the track hits, the narrative shifts. If it flops, the fallout is catastrophic. Possibility 2. Claressa Shields pivots and pretends the freestyle never happened, focuses exclusively on boxing content, and lets the news cycle move on. That's the safer path. It also relies on the internet being willing to forget, and this particular internet has never been especially forgiving. Possibility 3. Claressa Shields addresses it directly. Sits down with a major platform. Explains her side. Concedes what she needs to concede. Doubles down on what she believes. And uses the moment as a reset. That's the mature path, and it's the one many of her longtime supporters are quietly hoping for. Possibility 4. Somebody else in the hip-hop world escalates. Maybe a rapper drops a track. Maybe a podcaster runs a full breakdown. Maybe a documentary crew shows up. Once that happens, Claressa Shields no longer controls the narrative, and she may not control it much longer either way. Whichever direction this goes, one thing is certain. The Papoose, Remy Ma, Claressa Shields storyline is not fading. It is metastasizing. Every attempt to close a chapter opens two more. Every explanation raises 3 new questions. Every clip generates 5 more clips in response. This is a story with legs, and the legs are still running. Page 16, the closing verdict and open meta loop. So, what does this ultimately say about Claressa Shields, about her music aspirations, and about the ongoing feud that refuses to die? A few things stand out. It says that Claressa Shields is at her most vulnerable when she steps outside of boxing, and yet she keeps stepping outside of boxing. It says that the internet has developed a very particular memory for Claressa Shields, and that memory keeps getting refreshed with new material. It says that the Remy Ma denial, the Papoose deflection, and the Lil Kim comparison have collectively created a story arc that no PR team on earth can spin into a positive. For Claressa Shields fans, the message is complicated. The championships are still real. The Olympic medals are still real. The historic pay-per-views are still real. Nothing that happened on that podcast erases any of Claressa Shields' boxing accomplishments. But everything that happened on that podcast complicates the legacy conversation in ways that are going to matter for a very long time. Because legacies are not just about the wins. They're about the pattern. And the pattern right now is not flattering. For everybody else watching from the sidelines, the story is now bigger than Claressa Shields herself. It's about how public figures navigate multiple lanes at once. It's about whether music careers can be manufactured on top of athletic careers without eroding both. It's about how the internet distributes credit and consequence in real time. And it's about how one podcast appearance can either confirm or dismantle years of carefully constructed image work. Here's the last thing I want to leave you with, because it's the question that has been circulating in every group chat, every comment section, and every hip-hop podcast for the past week. If Claressa Shields walked into Sway in the morning tomorrow, sat in that chair, put on those headphones, and got asked to spit an actual freestyle, could she deliver? Or would we get another version of what we just watched? Because the answer to that question is going to determine whether the music chapter of Claressa Shields' career survives, or whether this podcast clip becomes the tombstone. And here's the meta question, the one that never really goes away. When the internet builds a narrative this fast, this loud, and this coordinated, is it fair? Is it accurate? Is it too much? Or is it just the natural consequence of a public figure choosing to keep dancing on the tightrope? Because Claressa Shields is not a passive character in this story. Claressa Shields is the author of most of these chapters. And if there's a next chapter, and there is always a next chapter, Claressa Shields is going to be the one writing it. Whether or not any of us like where it goes. The archive never blinks. The timeline never sleeps. And the story of Claressa Shields, Papoose, Remy Ma, and everything tangled around them, is not ending anytime soon. In fact, if the rumors coming out of Fight Week are even half accurate, we might be about 72 hours away from the next explosion. So keep your notifications on, because the next chapter is already being written, and you're going to want to see how this one lands.